Well, we are so thrilled to have in our portable studio here at CBF General Assembly 2024 Reverend Dr. Tolbert, Reverend Dr. Baxley, and Reverend Dr. Cassidy. We just come off an incredible luncheon for the McCall Award, where BSK received the McCall Award for Racial Justice. We are so honored to have Dr. Tolbert with us and for the work that NBCA has done. We're grateful for CBF, Dr. Baxley, for all of your work in creating space specifically for African American communities. Dr. Cassidy, we're always grateful for your work specifically at BSK Theological Seminary. And we're here to have a dialogue around theological education and ecclesial communities, specifically ecclesial communities that are both white and black, and the necessity of theological education. So let's jump right on in. We have two presidents with us of major denominations. Dr. Tolbert, you have been working with BSK for a couple of years now. Where have you seen the importance of theological education in your communities and churches?
Well, I think first of all, I want to congratulate BSK for this McCall Social Justice Award today. But in addition, to say that, to our audience that our convention, in my opinion, becomes more real. It is authenticated by the partnership with BSK, because as we plan for the future for our local congregations and enable them to build capacity to serve their communities, we need theological education to train the church leadership. And we did not have a direct line to a theological institution as a convention that we could call our own until the partnership with BSK. And so we're excited about it.
And I know that the NBCA wasn't just looking for any theological institution. You all were looking for Black-led, Black church studies programming to help specifically in your ecclesial communities. Dr. Cassidy, could you talk a little bit more about how BSK Theological Seminary has provided, specifically with the Institute for Black Church Studies, Dr. Lewis Brogdon, resources for NBCA and Dr. Tolbert's communities?
Absolutely. First of all, we appreciate very much Dr. Tolbert's invitation for us to become the seminary for the NBCA. It was that invitation that got the partnership going, and it has been transformative to us. We have seen enormous growth. There was pent-up demand, I believe, within the NBCA for ministers who were already serving and had not had the opportunity to do theological education to suddenly be able to do that. And it's just been a joy to work with these ministers as they've pursued their degrees. But the Institute has added to that work by providing work supporting our Cosby scholarships. So we have the Kevin and Barnetta Cosby Seminary Scholarship for African American descendants of slavery, and that scholarship has allowed a lot of students to be able to come and be part of a program. But the Institute has also been on the ground where the NBCA churches are, particularly in Louisiana, Texas, Florida, the Deep South. And so Dr. Brogdon and Erica Whitaker have both been part of providing training programs for leaders in the churches there. At the conventions that meet, at other events that are happening, and sometimes even the state level meetings. There's training that goes on there. So we've not only been working to provide theological education at the degree granting level, but also just helping church people feel good about the work that they're doing and to feel more empowered and well trained for that.
Dr. Baxley, CBF Global is constantly evolving in such beautiful ways, specifically around inclusion. And what we saw at the McCall Luncheon with our Pan-Africa Cornea really is astounding. What have you been noticing specifically in ecclesial communities, both white and black, and the need for theological education?
Well, it's really interesting. If we'd had this conversation 30 years ago, it would be entirely different. Because 30 years ago, most people who felt called to any kind of full-time Christian ministry in the CBF community would have been expected to graduate from college, relocate their lives, go to seminary full-time as a student, where they might have some kind of loose association with a church, then they would graduate from seminary and a church would hire them. So there was a kind of a pipeline. You go from your home church to college to seminary, and then you get sent back to the church. Well, that pipeline has just been decimated, or I would say maybe reimagined,
Yes,
to use
there
our
you go.
theme for the week. Because now what's happening is we're seeing more and more people in our congregations experiencing a sense of call, but who are not in a place in life where they can move and go to another place to go to seminary. And at the same time, the Association of Theological Schools has made it much more possible for schools like BSK to deliver theological education in innovative and different ways. So that now it's possible for something much more beautiful to happen. A person can do theological education while practicing ministry. And as a alumnus of a version of the old model, it's pretty simple for me to say, I think, that I've decided that the reimagination is better. Because ministry isn't just a set of ideas we learn in a classroom, it's a practice, and it's a way of life, and it's about leadership. And so I think we now have an opportunity to do ministerial preparation through theological education and congregational service simultaneously. And that's going to be a beautiful and complex reimagination that's going to require some things of denominations and some things of schools. The other thing that really I notice about the unique gift that is BSK is it's a place where early in our theological formation, white ministers can build relationships with Black Baptist ministers from NBCA. And that allows us to unmask our hidden prejudices,
Yes.
to come to terms with privilege in ways we didn't even used to know how to talk about, to learn new ways of expressing our faith. And there are lessons the Black church has to teach the white church in what it means to mentor people toward ministry. And so I really believe what's happening at BSK and the kind of co-denominational partnership between NBC and CBF allows a really unique opportunity for students who come from the CBF community. And then when people are serving in their communities, maybe their relationships people built in school that then have impact on communities and ministry.
Impact on communities and ministry. Let's just start where you ended. And you spoke, Dr. Baxley, mainly around unconventional education. And what I've learned from my sisters and brothers in the Black church tradition is that it is very much so we raise these kind of homegrown ministers up and we want to train them. But now we're seeing that it's not just a seminary full-time pastor position, but we're looking at lay leadership who are interested in theological education, and not just theological education from white institutions from the top down, but we're really seeing it from the ground up. Dr. Tolbert, can you speak into how you're seeing in your specific congregations lay leaders, deacons, elders, lay ministers who are getting theological education and the impact that that's having on in your churches?
Well, I think what's happening is that when the pulpit elevates its thirst and desire for theological education and then come back and the people are confronted with this new level of training, then it makes them feel it's a whole lot I don't know, I need to learn. And pastor is bringing this up. Where did he get that from? And then they want to know about the certificates program, what it was Flourishing in Ministry certificate program that BSK had. And so when we initially started this journey with BSK, there were some things that I asked that the president would consider, and that was that it would be 100% online and accredited by ATS, because we have many bivocational pastors in our denomination for sure, and they would never get an opportunity to get the education that BSK is offering if they had to quit their jobs, move their family to another city, resign their churches where they really feel they're called. This way they get an opportunity to not only listen to the theologian, give them the theological education, but they get an opportunity to apply the principles and to apply the principles in context. Because I think Dr. Cassidy would agree sometimes the theologians are saying things that don't quite connect in the local congregation. But the education that BSK provides allows for there to be dialogue between the theologian and the practitioner.
Yes.
And some of the practitioners' input comes in the classroom, whether online or however they are delivering it.
Well, and for us, we talk a lot about practical theology. We're an academic institution. We're accredited by ATS, but we are very focused on practical theology, on serving the needs of the church. And so I think what you're describing is exactly right, and we do see it happen in the classroom, because our classes are on Zoom, yes, but they're live, and people do develop incredibly deep relationships. So when we have opportunities, and we do, like at graduation recently, for our student body and faculty and staff to all be together physically, you see that these people know each other. And to your point, Paul, earlier, these ministers, black and white, they talk about some very difficult things in their coursework.
Yes.
And trust gets developed. And once you get to trust, that's a hard thing, right? Once you get there, you can begin to have conversations you couldn't have otherwise. Yeah. And that was what we think these ministers are going to use in their communities, in their place of ministry and service. They're going to have a capability to talk across racial issues and lines that is going to be unique, I think, and hopefully transformative for their communities.
And I think we start to learn from each other about our cultures.
Yes.
Between black and whites. I remember there was a time I went to lunch with a white pastor in Lake Charles because he called my office and asked to meet with me. And he said he had discovered that he didn't have any black pastors' phone numbers in his cell phone. He said, do you have any white pastors' numbers in yours? I said, well, I have yours. He said, so you have one and I have one. Both of us need to improve. That's what the lunch was about.
Yeah.
I had never thought about it. Yeah. If you don't have their phone numbers, you're probably not talking to them.
That's right.
And BSK blends all of that, especially with the cooperative Baptist piece. And I know there are white ministers from other denominations, but I feel that the National Baptist Convention of America, Cooperative Baptist Fellowship, we've got pastors and church leaders in those classes. I've taken some of those certificate programs and I saw it. And I learned listening, and I was spying initially to make sure that I was making the right decision.
Sure.
And I discovered that I had. One of the classes that was offered, and I don't know how many of them are in this formula, but that was a theologian and a pastor teaching it.
Yes.
Now, I'm not saying the pastor is not a theologian, but I think you know what I'm saying.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
So
not
you
the usual expectation.
That's right. So you had a theologian and a practitioner. And you'd hear the theologian say something, and then the practitioner would flesh it out in a way that you could understand it better than what the theologian had said. They were saying the same thing.
Yes.
But he was making it a little bit more practical because he's a practicing pastor. So I'm just excited.
And we
about
prepare
it.
a lot of chaplains and pastoral counselors. And most of our pastoral care courses are taught. We'll have a black and a white
That's correct.
Professional that are there because there are cultural differences
Yes.
that affect the kind of care that's given.
As you all are talking, what's going through my mind is not only is there the beautiful opportunity for courses to be taught by professors and practitioners side by side, but there's another level of conversation, which is students who are serving full-time in ministry ask different questions than students who are in the ivory tower.
That is correct.
So sometimes when I speak, I reference Cecil Sherman, who had this job before me and taught at BTSR. He taught, along with another faculty member, the first course in the D-Min program I had there. And he said, one of the reasons I like teaching in the D-Min program is by then students know how to ask better questions.
Yes.
Because in the old model, the MDiv students had never done anything in a church, really. But by the time you've been out several years, you come back for the Doctor of Ministry program, you had some experience, you were in ministry while you were doing the degree, and it changed the conversation. So I think the fact that these students, both from the National Baptist Convention of America and the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship and other places, are in class together while doing ministry is an added blessing, because the contexts are also different. So it's not just that black and white ministers are learning from each other, or professors and practitioners are complementing each other. It's all these different contexts that are forming each other in different ways. And I think that's going to make our ministers and our lay leaders who are interested in more theological education much more cross-culturally capable, much more able to provide the kind of collaborative leadership in their communities that we're going to have so that more of us have one another's phone numbers.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think, ecumenism is going to be impacted by this.
Yes.
Because we have different beliefs, even in the Baptist circle.
Especially.
And we develop a level of tolerance
Yeah.
of each other.
Absolutely.
And eventually, sometimes that tolerance becomes an appreciation.
Yes.
Yeah, and the tolerance isn't just like I'm going to tolerate you. It's a curiosity too.
That's right. That's right.
Why do you think that? I may not ever get there, but I'm curious to why, or where does that come from? And that curiosity then is going to ooze down into our congregations.
Yes.
Because at the end of the day, you three have been around a little bit longer than me.
Thank you.
Rumor has it.
You're welcome. You've seen the church in a variety of iterations, and you've heard what the church is crying out for, or what the church has been silent from. And so these conversations, these curiosities in which are taking place in places like BSK theological seminaries, hopefully will trickle down into congregational life. And so as we kind of wrap up here, I am curious to what conversations, what questions, what curiosities are you all hearing from the church that might inform BSK Theological Seminary about how we might better educate our congregations and ministers?
So this morning in our General Assembly, my colleague Brian Foreman moderated a conversation about callings. That's at the beginning of a new callings initiative for CBF.
Yes.
And of course, what we're finding is that more and more of the leaders of our youth ministries and children's ministries and music ministries will not have done, will likely not do an old-fashioned Master of Divinity degree.
That's correct.
Even in place, much less relocated. But now there's an incredible opportunity for denominational bodies and seminaries to think about what kind of certificates or educational opportunities, sprint courses, would help a layperson who's now leading the children's ministry or the youth ministry do that better. This is another place we have some things to learn from the Black church, because the Black church has been forming faith in youth and young people as a community and using the gifts of lay people, not just kind of hiring it out for years. So I think as we start building educational opportunities for people who might not be senior pastors of churches, but might be directors of youth ministries or ministers of youth or a variety of other places, there'll be all kinds of opportunities for new collaborations, because congregations are asking for assistance in the reimagination. Resources, new kinds of training. People aren't going to move around the world to study to be a children's director. And that's also going to affect the way we think about preparing pastors in another conversation. So I think there are tremendous needs. We convened the conversation this morning because of questions we hear from congregations. And there was tremendous energy in the room around that conversation. So it's really interesting that that conversation and the McCall Award to BSK Theological Seminary came in the same day in the same case, because BSK, aside from being a pioneer in racial justice, has also been at the front lines of innovation in alternative forms of theological education and developing new kinds of certificates and opportunities. So I think we'll have lots of opportunity to do good work together in the days ahead.
And I think, Paul, the thing I kind of whispered to you there on the seat while the conversation was going on is that many times in the Black church context, and I've been a pastor 40 years, so I figure I know at least my church and several others, we have individuals recognize their call and come to the church. But what I saw this morning was the noticing of a call on somebody's life by the congregation, then naming it, then nurturing it. And that's what I got out of the session this morning, which is kind of flipped the other way.
Yes.
And being a denominational leader, I'm going to be able to go back and talk about that and say, can you imagine the power of the congregation starting to notice the call upon somebody's life and naming it. And when I think about it, there are some deceased members of the church that I grew up in that I'm now pastoring 40 years that noticed the calling on my life and named it. And so that happened way back, but it doesn't happen as often. And I think we need to do more of that so that we can equip people from within to lead men into ministries that we are doing search committees externally about.
That's exactly.
And they got to come in and, every church has its own personality, its own
Preach.
those persons from within kind of already know that.
It's much more stable.
And Dr. Cassidy, how can we at BSK help prepare churches to create more space for those who are called? And that's really what we're trying to do, is to expand that holy imagination, that theological framework, that kind of ecclesial understanding of all God's children are called. How can we help these conversations that are going on in congregational life?
No, it's a really good question, and there are multiple ways. One of them is through podcasts like this, and in fact, we this grant-funded studio we're using right now, and the one that we have built in Louisville, we are going to be employing these at a high level to create all kinds of content for NPCA churches, for CBF churches across the lines. Because we think that kind of ongoing conversation that we can help build is going to be helpful. That's a way of doing theological education. It's not a class, but that's important. We also have been rethinking the ways that people can engage theological education. So as you mentioned, like I have an MDiv, that's what people used to get. And we still offer that and people get it. But for many, that is too big a bite.
90 hours.
It's 75 now, but even
Thank
that's
God
too big.
for the reduction.
Yeah, it takes too long. And so we now have a 36 hours master's degree, but we also have a wide variety of 9 hour. That's just 3 courses, graduate certificates. It goes on your transcript. And if we have this happen, we'll have students who will take a certificate. They'll do 3 courses and they'll say, well, I want to do another one. Well, next thing you know, they've got 9 hours. 18 hours, and they can transfer those into an MA program or an MDiv program if they want to. They don't have to. So they're basically creating new paths that will fit the lifestyle of bivocational, co-vocational leaders who have different time needs, but they still want and need some theological education.
And you just have people sitting in the pew that are not really currently in any leadership, that's now thirsting and hungering after righteousness.
Absolutely.
For a better way to say it. And with these certificate programs that BSK has, they can be nurtured.
Yes.
And in that nurturing process, there may be some noticing and some naming.
Preach.
Preach.
Nurture, notice. That's nice.
Yeah, I picked that up at CBS. One of my notes.
You stole that.
That's something I stole this morning.
That's good. That's good.
So I want you to know I was listening. The session was.
You definitely were
it was
listening.
fruitful.
I'm reminded of a story. Rest his soul. He's in heaven now. Jimmy Stevens.
Yes. In my town.
He's BSK student, would call me every couple months asking about the Institute for Black Church Studies. Older man, he passed rather suddenly a few months ago. We were able to give him an honorarium of the Masters of Arts.
He earned.
That is true.
Earned
He earned, because
Master
he
of
had
Arts.
earned a Master of Art. And he is a great illustration of someone in the church who said, I was never given the opportunity to study James Cone. I was never given the opportunity to study Black church studies. I was never given the opportunity to study womanist theology. I want to go back. I want to learn. And I think that is such a clear message, and to have his wife and his son present with us at graduation and all the work that she did for his degree, really inspiring. And that's what keeps me coming back to the need for theological education, because of how it impacts ecclesial communities. And so I'm going to give everyone one last word if they'd like to speak into something they've picked up along the way into the life of BSK, or specifically your denomination.
Well, I think I'll close on the note with the late Reverend Jimmy Stevens, who lived and pastored in Lake Charles. We grew up in the same Baptist District Association. We ended up at churches that were affiliated with different conventions, national conventions. But I would come home and talk about BSK, BSK, BSK until finally he signed up. And he didn't even tell me. I found out later that he was a student. But the interesting thing now, there's a young man at the church where he pastored who he had on staff. He begins in August as a student at Simmons,
Wow.
which
Awesome.
is putting him on track
Yep.
to be a student at BSK. So we can see this is a ripple effect of people who are getting connected because, first of all, Simmons and BSK, they have something to offer.
Yes.
And our job as a denomination, NBCA and probably CBF, is to connect them and make people aware. I think a lot of people in that room were made aware of something this morning that they did not know. And I correct myself. In General Assembly, I said we now have 60% African American. I found out in the McCall luncheon it's now up to 70%. It's a moving target.
It's a moving
We're
target.
going to take over.
You are. Go ahead.
You know, it really is a beautiful partnership.
Yes.
And I think even the conversation today illustrates the unique benefit that we have in the relationship that BSK has with the National Baptist Convention of America and the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship. We can eventually invite others into this collaboration because that's the way the work of God is. But we have a unique opportunity to impact congregations and participate in the transformation of communities. And it's going to require openness from us, a willingness to learn, and I'm grateful that CBF has a place, not just at this table, but in the work we do together.
And for theological education, partnerships are kind of a new thing. Used to, denominations would create their seminaries and feed them. And that model is not around for most places anymore. And so for us, we are excited to partner where we have shared mission and passion and where we feel like we can be responsive as a school, which I think is also kind of a new thing for seminaries. Not that they weren't responsive before, but in this day where there is so much change that is going on in our culture, in our congregations, it has to also happen in our seminaries where we rethink the way we do things so that it's more effective. And for us, the partnerships with NBCA, with Simmons, and with CBF Global, and then we also have formal partnerships with CBF Florida and the Caribbean Islands and CBF Virginia. And by the way, if you're listening, we're open to partnerships with other state CBF
Absolutely.
Organizations.
Louisiana.
Kentucky. So it's a new day, but I think I am the proudest of the BSK community in the fact that it is a learning community. It's willing not only to enter partnerships, but to change based on what we learn from our partners.
Well, thank you all for joining us
Thank
during
you.
this time for NBCA, for CBF, and we gave a shout out to Simmons, Dr. Cosby, who could not be with us, and we're just grateful for the work that BSK continues to do in these wonderful partnerships.
And now that I know you have this portable studio, we're going to partner in that also.
Yes, sir. And
Anytime.
we have one built in Louisville, too.
There you go.
Oh,
Thank you all so much.
thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. I'm David Cassidy, the president at Baptist Seminary of Kentucky, or BSK as we call it. If you've enjoyed this podcast, I hope you will take a moment to make a contribution so that we can continue to make excellent content like this podcast and so many others that we have planned. You can do so by going to bsk.edu and click on the Give button. Thank you so much for your support.